I don't know what that is.
It's my improvisation. I'm still a musician, too.
See, for the most part, we classical pianists don't improvise. The concert pianist's role over the last century solidified around the performing of other people's music. And our training tends to just be geared around that. There are exceptions, of course, one being pianist and tonebase artist Noam Sivan, who, in addition to being at home in contemporary styles, is also able to improvise fugues and sonatas on the spot.
He's making that up.
Noam used to teach an improvisation class at Curtis, and among his students was none other than Yuja Wang. Another classically trained musician with improv skills is Teddy Abrams, as is on display in his Tiny Desk concert, where you can watch him perform Beethoven sandwiched between improvisations. Teddy's ability to cross over between fully notated classical music and popular styles rooted in improvisation is reflected in his concerto, where at one point he calls for the soloist to improvise an extended section with the house jazz combo that's core to the orchestration. What is going through your head when you're about to have to just make up something completely?
I thought I was gonna lose my shit.
Can we imagine learning a language only by reading, memorizing, and reciting written texts without being able to speak that language fluently? Of course not. Similarly, we should not let the study of music suffer from this unnatural approach.
That's why critical listening is a much bigger part of a jazz musician's training, as compared with a classical musician who tends to study historical styles like their Latin, a dead language, pieces of which a small priesthood memorizes and recites at ritual gatherings. Oh God, what have I done with my life?
I love jazz. I love listening to jazz. So when he mentions something, I know what he's talking about.
When a classical pianist wants to speak jazz, they tend to reach for pieces by jazz-influenced composers who've written out all the notes in advance.
I mean, remind me of Kapustin, the encore plays everywhere.
And indeed, there are many passages in the Abrams concerto where Teddy has written out all the notes for the soloist to imitate certain iconic jazz improvisation styles.
This is so cool. It's written out for me. It's like a shorthand for what? Pretending I could improvise.
As the curtain rises towards the end of the overture, Yuja glisses her way onto the scene with ringing tremolos in the right hand, a la Earl Hines. Then as the band fades out, Yuja's left hand emerges with a walking bass marked backside of the beat. Then, after some faux improvised chordal riffs, Yuja's right hand takes off.
It feels like written out Artatum.
Yuja, your dream is to be able to just like come up with that out of your ass on the spot.
Yeah, without scores.
But it sounds like you've interpreted it exactly, authentically.
In doing her best Art Tatum impression, Yuja has to let go of certain conventions that stem from her classical training.
I don't know, I see some videos now everywhere on YouTube, like the jazz musicians there. The way they use their hand is like rubber. It's not none of the
Art Tatum's weird technique. Like they're kind of fat and they're stuck. Like his whole hand is like here, and then he's just doing the most delicate stuff.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of what makes it sound real is that there's a certain approach to rhythm where either you're on top of the rhythm or you're deeply in the rhythm.
Oh yeah, that's my favorite part.
This makes me go like this with my neck.
You want it to sound fly.
In other words, you gotta know how to groove, a somewhat foreign concept to most classical musicians.
Most classical music is all about sitting on top of the rhythm because we expect beats to be naturally flexible. But in this kind of music, I'm actually asking to forego that.
One of my great pianistic idols is Art Tatum. You know, when you listen to what he's laying down with his left hand, right? This stride bass and the freedom of the right hand. I mean, the music is grooving, it's popping, it has a vibrancy to it.
I mean, Horowitz is a huge fan of Art Tatum. He just went to a bar and like, oh, I wish I could play like that.
In his biography of Vladimir Horowitz, Harold Schoenberg tells the story this way. Horowitz was terribly impressed with Tatum's technique and his easy, natural way of playing, and on one occasion couldn't understand how Tatum did what he did in T for Two. So he introduced himself. Tatum admitted that, yeah, he'd heard of Vladimir Horowitz. The two men had a pleasant talk, and then Horowitz asked Tatum how long it had taken him to learn T for two. Tatum looked at him as though he were crazy. "I just made it up," he said. Horowitz's answer to Tatum was to create dazzling transcriptions of popular tunes to play his encore pieces, from T for Two to Stars and Stripes Forever to Bizet's Carmen, where he really leans into the syncopations and adds colorful jazz-inspired runs. Another feature you can hear in Yuja and Horowitz's groovy playing is that neither is afraid of playing staccato. Compare their sound to the typical classical pianist drunk on Chopin's rubato. And Gershwin actually picked up on this 100 years ago, writing, "Most pianists with a classical training fail lamentably in the playing of our ragtime or jazz, because they just use the pedaling of Chopin when interpreting the blues."
All guilt has to disappear when you pedal romantic music. Even when you see some dots, the composer wants you to detach the note with the help of the pedal.
Our study of the great romantic composers has trained us in the method of the legato, whereas our popular music asks for staccato effects. The romantic touch is very good in a sentimental ballade, but in a tune of strict rhythm, it is somewhat out of place.
Each note has its own articulation rather than being an insipid phrase like, yeah.
These are very different approaches to the fundamental structure of how the music is conceived. It's hard to actually live authentically in both worlds.
Yuja seems to have already inhabited both worlds, as is evident in her Rock 2, where, on the one hand, she shows off her romantic touch, and later in the same performance, you can hear her slap the keys right in the pocket in a way that would have made Gershwin smile. Given her many years listening to jazz, her 1 in a billion technique, her bionic ear, and her flair for adventure, when Yuja reached that place in the Abrams concerto which calls for her to improvise, she was ready.